In 1926, Gene Alger shot and killed a black police officer. He was sentenced to 2 to 21 years and walked free in just 26 months. That should have been the end of the story. But it was only the beginning. A new wife, new crimes, bank robberies, prison escapes, money schemes. Would Gene be let off again or weasel his way out on his own? This is the rest of the wildest story you never heard. I'm Chris, and this is Hidden Lens History, bringing the past back into focus. Just weeks after walking free, Gene Alger got married to Josephine Miller. 19 years old, schoolteacher, and the daughter of a Jeffersonville police sergeant. She had followed his trial closely, and some say she became enamored with the man she read about in the papers. Soon after his release, they were married. Together, they vanished into back roads and small towns, not on a honeymoon, but on a crime spree. They were suspected in a string of Indiana bank robberies: Paris Crossing, Summitville, Matthews, LaFontaine, Jonesville. But it was Paris Crossing that stuck. Witnesses remembered Gene's face. One said, "That's him! I'd never forget him!" Gene went inside. Josephine waited behind the wheel. Red hair tucked beneath a cloche hat, engine running. The wife of Indiana's bad boy in banditry. But living the life as bank robbers can only be a love story for so long. By fall of 1929, the net tightened. Gene, Josephine, Gail, and Gail's young wife were all spotted during a visit to Josephine's mother outside Henryville. A tip reached Sheriff Hughes. A posse of 100 men and 25 cars gathered like Paul Revere's riders. The chase tore through 30 miles of winding back roads. Officers fired more than 20 shots at the tires. Later, Sheriff Hughes would say, "We were afraid to shoot higher for fear of hitting the woman." Deputies set a roadblock near the state forest. Gene saw the trap and veered off into the woods. They ditched the car and scattered. The two women hid in a barn. Gene and his brother disappeared into the trees. Deputies, volunteers, and a state policeman fanned out through the forest as the light began to fade. One by one, they were captured. The headline read, "Gene Alger caught after thrilling 70-mile-an-hour chase." And just like that, the college boy bandit was behind bars again. But Gene Alger had always been good at dodging consequences. First, the murder charge, then, during parole, a speeding arrest that nearly sent him back to prison just one day before the Paris bank robbery. But now, after a statewide manhunt, he was in custody again. This time for good. Or so it seemed. Because this time, Gene wasn't the only one on trial. Josephine was charged too. The girl behind the wheel. The red-haired bandit queen. In court, she wore white gloves and claimed she was expecting a child. Her family sat behind her. And the story started to shift. She cried on the stand. Family and friends cried behind her. Reporters called it a tear show. Some saw her as manipulating. Others believed she was simply naive, in love with the wrong man. The jury couldn't agree. Deadlocked, and ultimately, a hung jury. She was tried again months later, and this time, she walked free, acquitted of all charges. One paper ran the headline beside a family photo, "Joe Alger may quit convict mate." Her family seemed more convincing than she did. But eventually, Josephine was finished with Gene Alger. Gene, meanwhile, was sentenced to 14 years. But Gene Alger wasn't finished. Putting him behind bars only made him more dangerous, more determined, and somehow harder to hold on to. Gene Alger had been sentenced to 14 years. The bank jobs, the high-speed chase, the prison time, it all caught up to him. He was moved to the Indiana State Prison at Michigan City. And from the outside, it seemed like the story was finally over. But Gene Alger didn't believe in stories that ended behind bars. On September 3rd, 1931, at just 23 years old, Gene Alger and another inmate, Charles Holmes, made their move. For weeks, they'd studied the heat tunnel that ran between the powerhouse and the shirt factory. From there, they tunneled straight down into a 24-inch wide sewer pipe. 6 inches of water, no light, 700 feet of twisting, reeking tunnel. And one mistake. They took a wrong turn. Thinking they'd reached the outside wall, they tried to lift a concrete manhole cover from below, but it was still inside the prison yard. Guards heard the noise and moved in. They found Alger, naked, and Holmes in just his underwear, ankle deep in sewage, trying to pry open the exit. Neither resisted. They were both placed in solitary confinement. This wasn't Alger's first escape attempt. It also wouldn't be his last. And yet somehow, the state would set him free once again. On April 6, 1939, just 8 years after trying to crawl out of a sewer, Gene Alger was paroled again. The man who had killed a traffic officer, escaped a sewer, robbed banks, got out early. And once again, he picked up right where he left off, because for all his skill at getting out of prison, Gene Alger seemed just as good at going back in. In 1940, he was arrested on forgery charges and placed in the Marion County Jail. But Gene Alger didn't sit still behind bars. He was already plotting his way out. He staged a hunger strike, then broke it with a pint of ice cream. Days later, he collapsed. Authorities moved him to the jail hospital. No shackles, no guard. By March, he was unguarded and recovering, likely a months-long escape plan. Noticing his chance, Alger sawed through the bars of his room using tools that had been smuggled inside. He slipped through steel mesh, slid down the side of the building using bed sheets, and did his best to blend into downtown Indianapolis. He even stopped to chat with a man on the street, said he was visiting from New York. Then he slipped into the crowd. But just as quickly as he vanished, he was found. Hours later, quietly sipping coffee in a downtown diner. Don't shoot, boys. I'll go. Back to prison. Again. But even then, this story refuses to end. In April 1945, Gene Alger walked out of prison. Once more. Released after serving 11 years of a 15-year sentence. The reason this time? Good behavior. Apparently, escaping prison doesn't count if you do it with a smile. It's 1945, and Gene Alger is a free man. That's right, a cop killer, a bank robber, 2 prison escapes, yet he keeps getting chances to start over. Could he put his criminal past behind him for good? 5 years later, he married again, and for the next decade, his name vanished from the headlines. It seemed, for once, he'd finally walked away from a life of crime. But Gene Alger didn't quit. He paused and used the quiet time he spent as a printer to imagine new ways to break the law. By the early 1960s, Alger was back in federal custody, this time for counterfeiting. Secret Service agents raided a garage linked to Alger's crew and found thousands of dollars in fake $10 bills. When they reached his home, they found even more. Some believed it was a small operation. Others thought Alger was part of something bigger, maybe even organized crime. Either way, authorities said the fake bills could have totaled $40,000. Even Alger's attorney was caught up in it. He was convicted in 1962, again in 1963. Whether he served time for the second one? Well, at this point, Does it even matter? Because by 1971, Gene Alger was still free, still finding trouble, and somehow still finding sympathy. That fall, he was picked up on a charge of public intoxication. The judge fined him $40, then immediately suspended it, saying, "Alger has had enough problems in his life." This, after decades of prison escapes, armed robberies, and federal counterfeiting. Just hours later, Alger was found dead on the floor of his trailer, surrounded by 9 empty beer bottles. The man who once held off police with a pistol in each hand died alone in a trailer park outside Indianapolis. No shootout, no cell, just freedom. The kind he could never seem to hold on to while he was alive. From a teenage thief to career convict to a washed-up drunk in a trailer. Gene Alger didn't just beat the system. He exhausted it. You've been watching Hidden Lens History, bringing the past back into focus. Have thoughts on this case? Or something we missed? Drop it in the comments. We're always digging, and your tip might just lead to the next photo and the next story. Have a specific headline, photo, or story we should restore next? Reach out. We'd love to see it.